The wrench slipped from Sergeant Kaya Thorne's oil-stained fingers as Captain Bradley's voice cut through the hangar's mechanical hum. "Think the grease monkey actually understands what she's looking at under that cowling," he said to Lieutenant Morrison, both men positioned close enough that their words carried clearly across the concrete floor. Morrison chuckled and shook his head. "Probably thinks the engine runs on fairy dust and good intentions. $20, says she couldn't tell a turbine blade from a screwdriver if her life depended on it." Kaya's jaw tightened as she retrieved the tool, her knuckles white against the metal handle. The A-10 Warthog's massive engine lay exposed before her, its intricate systems as familiar as her own heartbeat. Yet these pilots saw only coveralls and assumed incompetence. She'd been rebuilding aircraft engines since before either of them had earned their wings. But in their world, mechanics existed to turn wrenches while real aviators handled the thinking. Before we dive deeper into Kaya's story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar situations where someone's expertise was overlooked because of their job title or appearance. The hangar buzzed with pre-flight activity as ground crews prepared aircraft for the day's training missions. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across rows of military aircraft, their gray-green surfaces gleaming under the artificial illumination. The familiar scent of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid filled the air, mixing with the metallic tang of tools and the acrid smell of welding from nearby repair stations. Captain Bradley approached her workstation, his flight suit crisp and unmarked by grease or dirt. His expression carried the casual dismissiveness of someone who had never questioned the military's unspoken hierarchy. "Sergeant," he said, his tone suggesting he was doing her a favor by acknowledging her existence. "Make sure you don't miss anything obvious when you button up that engine. We can't afford to have maintenance oversights grounding combat-ready aircraft." Kaya looked up from the turbine assembly she'd been carefully inspecting, her dark eyes meeting his with steady professionalism. "The engine's running perfectly, sir. All systems are within optimal parameters, and I've completed the full diagnostic sequence." She gestured toward the complex machinery with practiced confidence. "The fuel delivery system shows excellent pressure consistency, and the turbine alignment is textbook perfect." Bradley's eyebrows rose slightly, as if surprised she could speak in complete sentences about aircraft systems. "Well, just make sure you follow the checklist exactly as written. We don't need mechanics trying to improvise or think beyond their training level." He turned to Morrison with a smirk that didn't quite hide his condescension. "Sometimes I wonder if they actually understand what those checklists mean, or if they just go through the motions." Lieutenant Morrison nodded in agreement, his own expression reflecting the same casual dismissal. "Probably safer that way," he replied. "Keep the technical thinking to the people who actually fly these things. Mechanics just need to follow instructions and keep their hands busy with the simple stuff." The words stung more than Kaya cared to admit, but she'd learned long ago that arguing would only reinforce their assumptions. Instead, she focused on the Warthog's engine, her experienced hands moving with precision through systems that most people found bewildering. Every component told a story to those who knew how to read it, and she could diagnose problems that would leave others scratching their heads for hours. Major Collins emerged from the briefing room, his weathered face bearing the serious expression of someone managing complex flight operations. He scanned the hangar floor before his gaze settled on the small group gathered around Kaya's workstation. "Everything on schedule out here," he called out. "We've got a tight timeline for today's exercises, and I need all aircraft mission-ready without delays." Captain Bradley stepped forward with the confident bearing of a pilot addressing a superior officer. "Yes, sir. We're just making sure the maintenance work meets our standards. You know how it is with support personnel. Sometimes they need a little extra supervision to ensure flight safety." Kaya's hands stilled on the engine components as she processed the casual way her competence had been questioned. Support personnel. The phrase carried implications that reduced years of training and experience to simple manual labor. She'd rebuilt engines that these pilots trusted with their lives, yet they saw her only as an obstacle to be managed rather than an expert to be consulted. Morrison added his own commentary with the casual authority of someone who'd never questioned his place in the military hierarchy. "We just want to make sure everything's done properly, sir." Sometimes the enlisted personnel get a little overconfident about their technical knowledge. Major Collins nodded absently, his attention already shifting to other concerns. "Just get it done right and get it done fast. We can't afford maintenance delays when training schedules are this tight." He looked directly at Kaya with the expectant expression of someone issuing orders to subordinates. "Sergeant, I need this aircraft fully operational within the hour." "Yes, sir," Kaya replied, her voice steady despite the frustration building in her chest. "The aircraft will be ready ahead of schedule. All systems are performing optimally, and the final inspection is nearly complete." The Major's expression suggested mild surprise that she'd spoken with such confidence about aircraft readiness. "Good," he said, though his tone carried the cautious approval of someone not entirely convinced. "Just make sure you don't rush through anything important." As the officers moved away to discuss flight plans and mission parameters, Kaya returned her attention to the Warthog's engine. Her hands moved with the sure confidence of someone who understood every bolt and wire, every system and subsystem that made these aircraft capable of their devastating effectiveness. She'd spent years mastering the intricacies of military aviation, but in their eyes, she remained invisible except as a potential source of problems. The engine's turbine blades caught the fluorescent light as she made final adjustments, their precise engineering a testament to the complexity these pilots assumed she couldn't comprehend. Each component had been designed to withstand incredible stresses while maintaining perfect performance, and she knew their tolerances and limitations better than most people knew their own vehicles. Captain Bradley's laughter echoed across the hangar as he shared some joke with his fellow aviators, the sound carrying casual confidence and unquestioned authority. In their world, mechanics existed to serve pilots, not to understand the sophisticated systems that made flight possible. They saw coveralls and assumed ignorance, missing entirely the expertise that kept their aircraft airborne and brought them home safely from every mission. The morning briefing room filled with the rustle of flight suits and the quiet murmur of pilots reviewing mission parameters. Kaya entered through the rear door, her maintenance tablet clutched against her chest, as she sought an empty chair along the back wall. Her presence drew immediate attention from several aviators who exchanged meaningful glances before Captain Bradley leaned toward his squadron mate. "What's the wrench Turner doing in here?" he whispered loud enough for nearby pilots to hear. "This is a flight briefing, not a shop floor meeting." Lieutenant Morrison suppressed a grin while nodding toward the front of the room. "Maybe she's lost. Someone should probably escort her back to the motor pool before she gets confused by all the technical talk." Major Collins stepped to the podium and began outlining the day's complex flight exercise, his words filled with tactical terminology and aircraft performance specifications. Kaya absorbed every detail while the pilots around her shifted uncomfortably, clearly bothered by her presence in what they considered their exclusive domain. The mission involved multiple aircraft coordination, precise timing requirements, and sophisticated electronic warfare scenarios that demanded expert knowledge of aircraft capabilities. During a pause in the briefing, Captain Bradley raised his hand with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to having his questions welcomed. "Sir, I'm wondering about the fuel load calculations for the extended range portion of this exercise. Given the payload requirements and environmental factors, are we cutting things close on our safety margins?" Major Collins consulted his notes before responding with detailed specifications about fuel consumption rates and reserve requirements. The technical discussion continued for several minutes, with various pilots contributing observations about aircraft performance under different conditions. Kaya listened intently, her mind automatically calculating the same parameters with precision born from years of intimate knowledge about these aircraft systems. When Lieutenant Morrison asked about engine performance at high altitude, Kaya shifted forward slightly in her chair. She knew the answer with absolute certainty, having personally calibrated engines for optimal performance across various atmosphere conditions. The specific modifications she'd implemented on several aircraft had improved their high-altitude efficiency beyond manufacturer specifications. But none of these pilots knew about her contributions to their aircraft's enhanced capabilities. "Sergeant," Major Collins said suddenly, his voice cutting through the technical discussion as he noticed Kaya's position near the front of the room. "Did you have maintenance concerns that need to be addressed before these aircraft launch?" The room fell silent as 24 pairs of eyes turned toward her with expressions ranging from mild curiosity to barely concealed irritation. Captain Bradley's face showed the patient condescension of someone prepared to humor a subordinate who'd overstepped boundaries. Lieutenant Morrison actually rolled his eyes before catching himself and assuming a more professional expression. "No, sir," Kaya replied steadily. "All aircraft are mission-ready with optimal performance parameters across all systems. I wanted to ensure full awareness of any modifications that might affect today's flight characteristics." Her words carried quiet confidence despite the hostile atmosphere surrounding her. Major Collins frowned slightly, his expression suggesting uncertainty about why a maintenance sergeant would need awareness of flight operations. "That's appreciated, Sergeant, but operational planning is handled by flight personnel. Maintenance concerns should be addressed through proper channels, not during pilot briefings." Captain Bradley seized the opportunity to reinforce the established hierarchy with barely disguised satisfaction. "Sir, perhaps we should establish clearer boundaries about briefing attendance. Having support personnel present during tactical discussions might create confusion about chain of command and operational responsibilities." The suggestion drew murmurs of agreement from several pilots who clearly viewed Kaya's presence as inappropriate. Lieutenant Morrison nodded emphatically while adding his own commentary. "Flight operations require specialized knowledge that takes years to develop. We wouldn't want maintenance personnel to misunderstand complex tactical requirements or feel pressure to contribute beyond their training level." Kaya's hands tightened on her maintenance tablet as the dismissive comments continued around her. These pilots trusted their lives to aircraft she'd personally optimized, yet they couldn't conceive that she might understand the same systems they relied upon. Her modifications had prevented mechanical failures, improved performance margins, and enhanced safety features, but her contributions remained invisible to people who saw only coveralls and assumed ignorance. Major Collins checked his watch with the impatient expression of someone managing tight schedules. "We need to complete this briefing and get aircraft airborne on time. Sergeant, please coordinate with flight operations through normal maintenance channels for any technical concerns." The dismissal was polite but unmistakable, and Kaya rose from her chair while maintaining professional composure despite the burning frustration in her chest. As she moved toward the exit, Captain Bradley's voice followed her with casual cruelty. Maybe next time she can attend a maintenance briefing where the technical level might be more appropriate for her background. Scattered chuckles from several pilots accompanied her exit, their laughter carrying the casual confidence of people who'd never questioned their assumptions about military hierarchy. The briefing room door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to underscore her exclusion from their exclusive world of flight operations and tactical planning. Back in the hangar, Kaya threw herself into final preparations with mechanical precision that masked her emotional turmoil. The A-10 Warthog sat before her like a trusted friend, its systems familiar and welcoming after the hostile environment of the briefing room. She ran her hands along control surfaces she'd personally calibrated, checking connections she'd installed, verifying performance parameters she'd optimized beyond manufacturer specifications. The irony wasn't lost on her that these same pilots who questioned her presence during briefings would soon trust their lives to aircraft she'd rebuilt from the ground up. Every bolt she'd tightened, every system she'd calibrated, every modification she'd implemented would keep them airborne and bring them home safely. Yet in their minds, she remained a simple mechanic whose understanding couldn't possibly extend beyond basic maintenance procedures. Sergeant Martinez approached her workstation with the easy familiarity of a fellow enlisted person who understood the peculiar dynamics of military hierarchy. "Heard you got the boot from the pilot briefing," he said with sympathetic understanding. "Those aviators really don't like sharing their sandbox with us ground pounders." Kaya looked up from the engine compartment she'd been inspecting, her expression reflecting years of accumulated frustration with willful ignorance. "They think understanding aircraft systems requires wings and a commission. Never occurs to them that someone might know these machines better than they do." Martinez nodded knowingly while glancing toward the briefing room, where pilots were still discussing their mission parameters. "Their loss," he replied simply. "You know more about these birds than most of them will ever learn. Just because they fly them doesn't mean they understand what makes them work." The hangar's familiar sound surrounded them as maintenance crews continued their methodical preparations, each person contributing specialized expertise to ensure mission success. Kaya returned her attention to the Warthog systems, her practiced hands moving with confidence through procedures that most people found incomprehensible. Soon these same aircraft would be airborne with pilots who trusted machines they didn't fully understand, maintained by people they refused to respect. The afternoon sun streamed through the hangar's high windows as Kaya knelt beside the Warthog's landing gear assembly, her trained eye detecting the subtle vibration pattern that indicated bearing were beyond acceptable tolerances. She reached for her diagnostic equipment just as Captain Bradley's voice echoed across the concrete floor, sharp with irritation and directed at Lieutenant Morrison. "Did you see that mechanic trying to offer input during the technical discussion?" he said, his words carrying the exasperated tone of someone dealing with persistent annoyance. "Next thing you know, she'll be telling us how to fly combat missions. These support people really need to understand their limitations and stick to turning wrenches." Lieutenant Morrison laughed while shaking his head in apparent disbelief. "Seriously, what's next? Maybe she thinks she understands avionics systems or weapon delivery protocols. Some people just don't know when to stay in their lane and let the professionals handle the complex thinking." Kaya's jaw clenched as she continued her inspection, her hands steady despite the anger building in her chest. The bearing assembly showed clear signs of premature, where that could lead to catastrophic failure during high-stress maneuvers, exactly the kind of technical analysis these pilots assumed she couldn't perform. Her diagnostic skills had prevented countless mechanical failures, yet they persisted in viewing her expertise as presumptuous overreach. Chief Warrant Officer Patterson approached the group of pilots with the measured stride of someone carrying administrative responsibilities. He clutched a clipboard filled with maintenance schedules and personnel assignments, his expression reflecting the perpetual stress of managing complex logistics. "Gentlemen," he called out, "we need to discuss some concerns about maintenance protocol adherence." Captain Bradley turned toward Patterson with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to having his opinions valued by leadership. "Chief, I think we might have a situation developing with one of the maintenance personnel. There seems to be some confusion about appropriate boundaries between support functions and operational planning." Patterson's eyebrows rose with interest as he prepared to address what sounded like a personnel management issue. "What kind of confusion are we talking about, Captain? Are there specific incidents or behaviors that need correction through proper channels?" The sergeant assigned to Aircraft 7 has been attending pilot briefings and attempting to contribute technical input during flight planning discussions, Bradley explained with the patient tone of someone reporting obvious misconduct. "She seems to think her maintenance background qualifies her to participate in operational decision-making beyond her training level." Lieutenant Morrison nodded in enthusiastic agreement, while adding his own observations about inappropriate boundary crossing. She was asking questions about flight parameters and aircraft performance specifications like she actually understood the tactical implications. It's creating confusion about chain of command and proper communication protocols. Chief Patterson made notes on his clipboard while frowning with the concerned expression of someone identifying potential discipline problems. That does sound like overreach beyond assigned responsibilities. Maintenance personnel should coordinate through established channels rather than directly engaging with operational planning processes. Kaya listened to their discussion while continuing her detailed inspection of the landing gear assembly. The bearing where pattern told a clear story about stress loads and operational history that most people couldn't interpret. Yet these same individuals questioned her ability to understand basic aircraft systems. Her analysis could prevent mission-critical failures, but they saw only presumptuous interference with their exclusive domain. The irony struck her with particular force as she identified additional components showing early signs of fatigue stress. These pilots would soon trust their lives to systems she understood better than they did, yet they couldn't acknowledge expertise that didn't come with wings and an officer's commission. Her recommendations could improve safety margins and extend component life, but they preferred ignorant compliance to knowledgeable collaboration. Chief Patterson approached her workstation with the serious expression of someone prepared to address disciplinary concerns. "Sergeant Thorne," he said formally, "I need to discuss some reports about inappropriate attendance at pilot briefings and attempts to contribute beyond assigned maintenance responsibilities." Kaya looked up from the bearing assembly she'd been examining, her expression remaining professional despite the frustration burning in her chest. "I attended one briefing to ensure awareness of any operational factors that might affect aircraft performance or maintenance requirements, Chief. Standard protocol for mission-critical preparation." Patterson consulted his clipboard before responding with the careful tone of someone managing potential conflicts between different military specialties. "The pilots have expressed concerns about maintenance personnel participating in operational discussions beyond their technical expertise. We need to maintain clear boundaries between support functions and flight operations." Captain Bradley stepped closer with barely concealed satisfaction at seeing disciplinary action being taken against the presumptuous mechanic. "Chief, I think it's important to establish that flight operations require specialized knowledge that takes years of training to develop. We can't have support personnel thinking they understand tactical requirements or aircraft capabilities at that level." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and Kaya felt her hands tighten on the diagnostic equipment as she processed the casual dismissal of her expertise. These pilots flew aircraft she'd rebuilt from the ground up, trusting systems she'd optimized and components she'd personally calibrated, yet they couldn't conceive that she might understand the machines better than they did. Chief Patterson nodded while making additional notes about the situation. "Going forward, Sergeant, please coordinate any operational concerns through proper maintenance channels rather than direct participation in pilot briefings. We need to maintain appropriate boundaries between different functional areas." Lieutenant Morrison added his own commentary with the helpful tone of someone offering constructive guidance. Maybe she could attend maintenance-specific briefings where the technical level would be more appropriate for her background and training. That way everyone stays in their proper role without confusion about responsibilities. The suggestion drew murmurs of agreement from nearby pilots who clearly viewed the resolution as appropriate correction of inappropriate behavior. Kaya absorbed their casual dismissal while continuing her inspection of critical aircraft components, her expertise invisible to people who saw only coveralls and assumed ignorance about complex military systems. As the group dispersed to continue their pre-flight preparations, Kaya returned her attention to the Warthog's landing gear assembly. The bearing where pattern required immediate attention to prevent potential catastrophic failure during high-stress operations, exactly the kind of technical analysis these pilots assumed exceeded her capabilities. Her recommendations could save lives and prevent mission failures, but they preferred enforced ignorance to acknowledged expertise. Sergeant Martinez appeared at her workstation with the knowing expression of someone who'd witnessed the entire disciplinary discussion. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "They want you to stay in your lane and leave the thinking to the college boys with wings." Kaya looked up from her diagnostic equipment, her expression reflecting years of accumulated frustration with willful blindness to obvious expertise. "They think understanding aircraft requires a commission and flight training. Never occurs to them that someone might know these machines from the inside out without needing to fly them." The hangar buzzed with continued activity as maintenance crews prepared aircraft for afternoon training missions, each person contributing specialized knowledge that kept sophisticated military systems operational. Kaya continued her methodical inspection while processing the casual cruelty of people who dismissed expertise they couldn't recognize, trusting their lives to machines maintained by individuals they refused to respect. The red warning light on Kaya's diagnostic tablet blinked with urgent persistence as she completed her analysis of the hydraulic pressure readings from Aircraft 12. The data showed clear evidence of system degradation that would compromise flight safety within hours. Yet her attempts to communicate these findings have been systematically dismissed by the same pilots who would soon trust their lives to these failing systems. Captain Bradley emerged from the operations center with Lieutenant Morrison, both men carrying flight bags and displaying the confident swagger of aviators preparing for afternoon training missions. Their conversation carried across the hangar floor with casual authority as they discussed tactical scenarios and aircraft assignments without any apparent concern for the technical warnings Kaya had been documenting. "Did you hear about the engine trouble on Bird 7? Morrison said while adjusting his flight suit with practiced efficiency. "Maintenance says it's minor, but I'm wondering if we should consider alternate aircraft assignments just to be safe." Bradley shrugged with the dismissive confidence of someone who'd never questioned the competence of support personnel. "If maintenance signed off on it, then it's good to go. These mechanics know their basic procedures well enough to keep us airborne. We can't let minor technical concerns delay training schedules when readiness requirements are this demanding." Kaya looked up from her diagnostic equipment as she processed their casual acceptance of potentially dangerous mechanical conditions. Aircraft 7 showed early signs of turbine blade fatigue that could lead to catastrophic engine failure during high-stress maneuvers, information she tried unsuccessfully to communicate through proper channels. Her warnings have been filed away as routine maintenance observations rather than urgent safety concerns requiring immediate attention. Major Collins appeared in the hangar doorway with a hurried expression of someone managing multiple competing priorities. He scanned the flight line before his gaze settled on the group of pilots preparing for their mission launch. "Gentlemen," he called out, "we need to discuss some concerns about aircraft availability and maintenance scheduling conflicts." The pilots gathered around their commanding officer with expressions reflecting professional attention to operational requirements. Captain Bradley stepped forward with the confident bearing of someone prepared to address leadership concerns about mission readiness. "Sir, what kind of maintenance issues are we dealing with? Are there specific aircraft that need to be pulled from today's training rotation?" Major Collins consulted his tablet while frowning with apparent frustration about schedule disruptions. "We've got reports of hydraulic anomalies on Bird 12 and some engine parameters on 7 that maintenance flag for observation. The question is whether these issues require immediate grounding or if we can continue operations with enhanced monitoring protocols." Lieutenant Morrison interjected with the practical tone of someone focused on maintaining training schedules despite technical complications. "Sir, how serious are these maintenance concerns? Are we talking about minor issues that can wait for scheduled maintenance windows, or do we have genuine safety problems that require immediate attention?" Kaya felt her stomach tighten as she listened to their discussion of aircraft she knew were developing serious mechanical problems. The hydraulic system on Bird 12 showed pressure fluctuations that indicated imminent seal failure, while the engine parameters on 7 reflected turbine degradation that could cause complete power loss during critical flight phases. Her detailed analysis had documented these dangers with precision, yet her warnings remained buried in routine maintenance paperwork. Chief Patterson approached the group with his clipboard and the weary expression of someone managing conflicting demands between operational requirements and safety protocols. "Major, I've reviewed the maintenance reports and spoken with the technical personnel. The issues appear to be within acceptable parameters for continued operations, though we'll want to monitor them closely during flight operations." Captain Bradley nodded with satisfaction at receiving confirmation that training missions could proceed as planned. "That's what I figured, Chief. These mechanics tend to be overcautious about minor technical variations. As long as the aircraft meet basic safety standards, We can't let routine maintenance concerns interfere with mission readiness requirements. The casual dismissal of her expertise stung with particular intensity as Kaya realized her detailed warnings had been reduced to overcautious observations by people who lacked the technical knowledge to evaluate her findings. Years of training and experience in aircraft systems had given her the ability to detect problems before they became catastrophic, yet her insights were dismissed as excessive worry from support personnel who didn't understand operational priorities. Major Collins checked his watch with the impatient expression of someone managing tight schedules. We need to get these aircraft airborne within the hour to maintain training timeline requirements. Chief, please ensure that maintenance personnel understand the importance of not delaying operations for minor technical concerns that fall within acceptable parameters. Patterson made notes on his clipboard while nodding in agreement with operational priorities over maintenance recommendations. I'll make sure the technical staff understands that routine variations shouldn't trigger unnecessary grounding recommendations. We need to maintain focus on genuine safety issues rather than theoretical concerns about minor system fluctuations. Kaya watched in growing alarm as her specific warnings about dangerous mechanical conditions were characterized as theoretical concerns by people who lacked the expertise to evaluate aircraft systems. The hydraulic pressure readings she documented showed clear evidence of impending failure, while the engine parameters indicated turbine damage that could cause catastrophic loss of power during flight operations. Lieutenant Morrison added his own perspective about balancing safety concerns with operational requirements. Sir, maybe we need to establish clearer guidelines about when maintenance recommendations require operational delays versus enhanced monitoring during flight operations. That way we can maintain training schedules while still addressing legitimate safety concerns. The suggestion drew murmurs of agreement from pilots who clearly preferred solutions that didn't interfere with their flying schedules. Captain Bradley nodded enthusiastically while adding his own thoughts about appropriate boundaries between maintenance observations and operational decision-making. Exactly right. We can't let support personnel make operational choices that should be handled by qualified flight personnel with appropriate training and experience. As the group dispersed to continue mission preparations, Kaya stared at her diagnostic tablet with growing dread about aircraft that would soon be airborne with pilots who dismissed her warnings about dangerous mechanical conditions. The data showed clear evidence of systems approaching failure, yet her expertise had been systematically discounted by people who saw only an overcautious mechanic rather than a technical specialist with superior knowledge of aircraft systems. Sergeant Martinez approached her workstation with the concerned expression of someone who'd overheard the operational discussion. "They're really going to fly those birds with the problems you found," he said quietly, "even after you documented all those system anomalies and pressure variations." Kaya looked up from her equipment, her expression reflecting the helpless frustration of someone whose expertise was invisible to people making life-and-death decisions. They think I'm being overcautious about minor technical issues. Never occurs to them that I might actually understand these systems better than they do, or that my warnings might prevent catastrophic failures during flight operations. The hangar filled with the sound of engines starting as pilots prepare to launch aircraft that Kaya knew carried serious mechanical problems. Her detailed analysis had identified dangerous conditions that required immediate attention, yet her warnings have been dismissed as routine maintenance observations by people who trusted their lives to machines they didn't truly understand. The emergency klaxon's piercing wail echoed through the operations center as Major Collins burst through the doors with urgency written across his weathered features. Radio chatter filled the air with reports of enemy ground positions threatening friendly forces in Sector 7, requiring immediate close air support from A-10 Warthogs within the next 40 minutes to prevent catastrophic losses. Captain Bradley looked up from his mission planning materials with the focused attention of someone suddenly facing real combat rather than training exercises. "Sir, what's the tactical situation?" he asked while reaching for his flight gear. "Are we talking about a full deployment or limited engagement with specific target parameters?" Major Collins spread tactical maps across the briefing table with hands that moved with practiced efficiency despite the obvious stress of managing crisis operations. We've got ground forces pinned down by entrenched positions that require precision ground attack capabilities. The enemy has established defensive positions with heavy weapons that conventional artillery can't neutralize without unacceptable collateral damage risks. Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward with the eager expression of someone ready to transition from training to actual combat operations. "Sir, how many Warthogs do you need airborne, and what's our timeline for engagement? We can have aircraft ready for launch within standard preparation protocols if maintenance has cleared them for combat operations." The Major's expression darkened as he consulted his tactical display, showing friendly forces under increasing pressure. "That's where we have a problem, gentlemen. We need 2 fully operational A-10S airborne within 30 minutes. But Captain Stevens and Lieutenant Parker are both down with food poisoning from last night's mess hall incident. We're looking at a shortage of qualified Warthog pilots just when ground forces need immediate support." Captain Bradley frowned as he processed the implications of pilot unavailability during a critical mission requirement. "Sir, what about backup pilots from other squadrons or neighboring bases? Surely we can get qualified A-10 operators here within the required timeline to support ground operations." Major Collins shook his head with the grim expression of someone facing limited options during time-critical operations. "The nearest qualified pilots are at Peterson Air Force Base, over 2 hours away by fastest transport. Our ground forces can't wait that long without suffering casualties that could have been prevented with timely close air support." The tactical display showed red indicators marking enemy positions that threatened friendly forces with sophisticated weapons systems requiring precision attacks from aircraft specifically designed for close air support missions. A-10 Warthogs possessed unique capabilities for neutralizing ground threats while minimizing risks to friendly personnel, but their complex systems required pilots with specialized training and combat experience. Lieutenant Morrison consulted his squadron roster with growing frustration about pilot availability during crisis situations. "Sir, what about cross-training pilots from other aircraft types? Could we get F-16 or F-18 pilots to handle the Warthog mission requirements on short notice?" Major Collins examined the tactical requirements with the experienced eye of someone who understood aircraft capabilities and mission specifications. "The Warthog systems are too specialized for improvised cross-training during combat operations. We need pilots with specific A-10 experience and weapons delivery training for this type of precision ground attack mission." The operations center buzzed with activity as personnel scrambled to identify solutions for pilot shortages during time-critical combat requirements. Radio communications provided constant updates about ground forces under increasing pressure, while tactical displays showed enemy positions that required immediate neutralization to prevent friendly casualties. Chief Patterson entered the briefing area with his clipboard and the concerned expression of someone managing personnel resources during crisis operations. "Major, I've contacted every available source for qualified A-10 pilots within reasonable travel distance. The earliest we could get someone here is 90 minutes, assuming immediate departure and optimal transport conditions." Captain Bradley studied the tactical display with growing concern about timeline constraints versus operational requirements. "Sir, 90 minutes might be too late for effective ground support. The enemy positions could overrun friendly forces before we get aircraft airborne with qualified pilots." The Major's jaw tightened as he processed the impossible choice between sending unqualified pilots into complex combat operations or allowing ground forces to face superior enemy positions without air support. Radio reports continued, describing deteriorating tactical situations that required immediate intervention from aircraft specifically designed for close air support missions. Lieutenant Morrison voiced the question that everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to address directly. "Sir, what are our options when we have mission-critical requirements, but no qualified personnel available within the necessary timeline? Do we risk sending less qualified pilots, or do we accept that ground forces will have to manage without air support?" Major Collins stared at the tactical display, showing friendly forces in increasingly desperate situations, while enemy positions maintained advantages that only precision air attacks could neutralize. The weight of command responsibility pressed down on him as he faced decisions that could determine whether soldiers lived or died based on aircraft availability and pilot scheduling. The radio crackled with another update from ground forces requesting immediate status on promised air support, their voices carrying the tension of people under fire who needed help that might not arrive in time. Enemy positions have been identified and marked for attack, but without qualified pilots, even the most sophisticated aircraft remained useless metal sitting in hangars. Chief Patterson reviewed his personnel files with the desperate expression of someone searching for overlooked options during crisis situations. Major, I've exhausted all standard sources for qualified A-10 pilots within reasonable distance. Unless we have someone with hidden qualifications that isn't reflected in normal personnel records, we're looking at significant delays that could compromise ground operations. Captain Bradley examined the mission requirements with growing frustration about operational limitations imposed by personnel shortages. Sir, the tactical situation requires immediate action that we can't provide due to pilot availability. Ground forces are depending on air support that we can't deliver within the required timeline. The operations center filled with tension as personnel grappled with the reality of having sophisticated aircraft available but lacking qualified pilots to operate them during critical combat situations. Time continued passing while enemy positions maintained advantages that threatened friendly forces who had been promised air support that might not materialize. Major Collins made final attempts to contact additional sources for qualified pilots, while knowing that time was running out for effective intervention. The tactical situation demanded immediate action from A-10 Warthogs, but without experienced pilots, even the most capable aircraft couldn't provide the precision ground attack capabilities that ground forces desperately needed. Kaya continued her work on aircraft systems while overhearing the increasingly desperate discussions about pilot shortages during critical missions. The irony wasn't lost on her that perfectly operational aircraft sat ready for combat operations, but assumptions about pilot qualifications were preventing effective response to tactical requirements that demanded immediate action from A-10 Warthogs. Major Collins paced the operations center with phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying desperate urgency as he contacted every military installation within 300 miles. Peterson Air Force Base, this is Collins at Whiteman. I need any qualified A-10 pilot you can spare for immediate combat deployment. We've got ground forces under fire and a window closing fast. The response crackled through the speaker system for everyone to hear, the distant controller's voice carrying regretful finality. Negative, Whiteman. Our A-10 squadron is deployed overseas and won't return for 6 weeks. Next closest qualified pilots are at Davis-Monthan in Arizona. Minimum 4 hours transport time, even with priority routing. Captain Bradley slammed his hand against the briefing table with frustration that echoed through the tense operations center. For hours, he said bitterly. By then our ground forces could be overrun completely. Those soldiers are counting on air support that we can't provide because of pilot scheduling conflicts. Lieutenant Morrison studied the tactical display, showing enemy positions growing stronger while friendly forces remained pinned down under increasingly effective fire. Sir, what about emergency cross-qualification protocols? Could we get F-16 pilots temporary authorization for A-10 operations given the crisis circumstances? Major Collins shook his head while reviewing Air Force regulations on his tablet. The Warthog systems are too specialized for emergency cross-training. Weapons delivery, targeting systems, and low-altitude attack profiles require specific certification that takes weeks to complete properly. We can't risk pilot safety and mission effectiveness with improvised qualifications. The radio squawked with another urgent transmission from ground forces requesting status updates on promised air support. Alpha 7 to base. We need immediate ETA on close air support. Enemy positions are zeroing in on our location, and we're taking casualties without air cover. Request immediate confirmation of Warthog deployment timeline. Chief Patterson coordinated multiple phone calls while maintaining detailed lists of contacted bases and available personnel. His expression grew increasingly grim as each conversation yielded the same disappointing results. Sir, I've reached every A-10 squadron within reasonable distance. The earliest qualified pilot we can get here is Lieutenant Colonel Williams from Shaw Air Force Base, but he needs minimum 3 hours transport time. Captain Bradley examined the timeline requirements against tactical necessities with growing desperation about impossible choices. 3 hours puts us well past the effective intervention window. Ground forces need support now, not when the tactical situation has already been decided by enemy superiority. The operations center buzzed with frantic activity as personnel exhausted every possible source for qualified pilots during time-critical combat operations. Communications specialists coordinated with multiple installations while intelligence officers provided updates about deteriorating ground conditions that required immediate air intervention. Major Collins attempted contact with Air National Guard units and reserve squadrons across multiple states, his voice growing hoarse from repeated explanations of urgent pilot requirements. Each conversation followed the same pattern of helpful intentions undermined by geographical distance and transport limitations that made timely response impossible. Lieutenant Morrison voiced the frustration everyone felt about having sophisticated aircraft available, but lacking personnel to operate them effectively. Sir, it's maddening to have perfectly operational Warthogs sitting ready for combat while soldiers die, because we can't find qualified pilots within reasonable distance. The tactical display continued showing enemy positions consolidating advantages, while friendly forces lost ground despite superior training and equipment. Without air support, even the most capable ground units faced overwhelming disadvantages against entrenched opponents with heavy weapons and prepared defensive positions. Chief Patterson received another negative response from distant air bases and marked additional installations off his increasingly shortened list of potential pilot sources. Major, I'm running out of options here. We've contacted every A-10 squadron in the continental United States, and the transportation timelines exceed our tactical requirements. Captain Bradley studied mission parameters with the growing realization that operational limitations might force abandonment of ground forces who had been promised air support. Sir, what's our contingency plan if we can't get qualified pilots here within the tactical timeline? Do we have alternative options for supporting ground operations? Major Collins examined available resources with the desperate creativity of someone facing impossible choices during combat operations. We could attempt artillery support, but the enemy positions are too close to friendly forces for safe fire missions. Precision air attacks are the only viable option for neutralizing threats without causing fraternal casualties. The radio provided constant updates about ground forces under increasing pressure, while promised air support remained unavailable due to pilot shortages. Enemy positions used sophisticated weapons systems that required precision attacks from aircraft specifically designed for close air support missions, capabilities that only A-10 Warthogs could provide effectively. Lieutenant Morrison attempted contact with retired pilots and civilian contractors with military experience, hoping to identify overlooked sources for qualified personnel during crisis situations. Each conversation revealed the same limitation. A-10 qualification required current certification and recent flight experience that couldn't be improvised during emergency operations. Chief Patterson coordinated with Transport Command about expediting pilot movement from distant bases, but even priority routing couldn't overcome the fundamental limitation of geographical distance during time-sensitive operations. The closest qualified pilots remained hours away, while ground forces needed immediate support that appeared increasingly unlikely. Captain Bradley voiced the bitter reality that everyone understood, but nobody wanted to acknowledge directly. Sir, we're looking at mission failure due to personnel limitations rather than equipment availability or tactical constraints. We have the aircraft and weapons needed for successful ground support, but we lack qualified people to operate them. The operations center filled with tension as personnel grappled with the implications of having sophisticated military capabilities rendered useless by scheduling conflicts and geographical limitations. Ground forces continued requesting status updates about air support that command couldn't provide within required timelines. Major Collins made final attempts to identify emergency options while knowing that conventional sources had been exhausted without producing viable solutions. The weight of command responsibility pressed down on him as soldiers faced life-and-death situations that proper air support could resolve, if only qualified pilots were available. Kaya listened to the increasingly desperate conversations while continuing maintenance work on aircraft that could provide exactly the combat capabilities ground forces needed. The irony struck her with particular force that operational aircraft sat ready for immediate deployment, but assumptions about pilot availability prevented effective response to critical tactical requirements. The radio crackled with increasing desperation as Alpha 7 transmitted another urgent request for air support status. Base, we're down to our last defensive position and taking heavy casualties. Enemy armor is advancing on our location with supporting infantry. We need those Warthogs airborne immediately, or we're looking at complete unit loss within the hour. Major Collins stared at the tactical display with the haunted expression of someone watching soldiers die, while possessing the means to save them, but lacking the personnel to execute the mission. His hands trembled slightly as he keyed the radio response. Alpha 7, we're still working on pilot availability. Maintain defensive positions, and we'll get you support as soon as humanly possible. The reply came back immediately, tinged with barely controlled panic from ground forces facing overwhelming odds. Base, humanly possible isn't working for us down here. We've got T-72 tanks moving into firing position, and our anti-tank missiles are nearly expended. Without air support in the next 20 minutes, we're going to be overrun completely. Captain Bradley studied the mission parameters with growing anguish about tactical capabilities rendered useless by personnel limitations. Sir, we have 2 fully operational A-10s loaded with appropriate ordnance for tank-busting missions. The aircraft are perfect for this engagement, but without qualified pilots, they're just expensive hangar decorations. Lieutenant Morrison monitored multiple communication channels while coordinating with distant air bases about emergency pilot transport options. Sir, Shaw Air Force Base confirms Lieutenant Colonel Williams is en route, but even with priority transport, he's still 2 hours out. Davis Monthan says they could have someone here in 3.5 hours minimum. The tactical situation continued deteriorating as intelligence updates showed enemy forces consolidating positions while friendly units lost ground despite desperate resistance. Without precision air attacks against enemy armor, even the most capable ground forces faced insurmountable disadvantages against superior numbers and heavy weapons. Major Collins attempted one final contact with Reserve Command about emergency activation of retired pilots with current medical clearances. The conversation lasted several tense minutes before yielding the same disappointing result. No qualified A-10 pilots available for immediate deployment within tactical timeline requirements. Chief Patterson reviewed personnel files with the desperate thoroughness of someone searching for overlooked qualifications during crisis operations. Major, I've gone through every pilot record on this base twice. We have excellent F-16 and F-18 operators, but nobody with current A-10 certification except Stevens and Parker, who are both still incapacitated from food poisoning. The operations center filled with the sound of multiple phone conversations as personnel made increasingly desperate attempts to identify emergency pilot sources. Each conversation followed the same pattern of helpful intentions undermined by geographical limitations and certification requirements that couldn't be waived during combat operations. Captain Bradley voiced the bitter frustration that everyone felt about operational limitations imposed by bureaucratic constraints. Sir, somewhere in this country, there have to be qualified A-10 pilots who could get here faster than our current options. This can't be the only solution available for emergency situations. Lieutenant Morrison coordinated with air traffic control about expediting transport for distant pilots, while knowing that even optimal routing couldn't overcome fundamental limitations of time and distance. "Sir, I've requested priority flight paths and emergency clearances, but physics still limits how quickly we can move people across multiple states." The radio provided another update from ground forces describing increasingly desperate tactical conditions. "Base, enemy tanks are within effective range of our positions. We're taking direct fire from main battle tanks while trying to maintain defensive formations. Request immediate confirmation of air support timeline or authorization to attempt tactical withdrawal." Major Collins examined withdrawal options with the grim realization that retreat might result in strategic objectives being abandoned to enemy forces. The ground units occupied critical positions that couldn't be surrendered without compromising broader operational goals, yet continued defense without air support appeared increasingly futile. Chief Patterson attempted contact with civilian contractors and retired military pilots with emergency recall provisions, hoping to identify overlooked sources for qualified personnel during crisis situations. Each inquiry revealed the same limitation. A-10 operations required current certification and recent flight experience that couldn't be improvised. Captain Bradley studied available aircraft with growing frustration about sophisticated capabilities rendered useless by personnel constraints. "Sir, we have exactly the right equipment for this mission. Those Warthogs were designed specifically for the kind of close air support that ground forces need right now." The tactical display showed enemy positions advancing steadily, while friendly forces expended remaining resources in increasingly desperate defensive actions. Time continued passing while promised air support remained unavailable due to pilot shortages that conventional solutions couldn't resolve within required timelines. Lieutenant Morrison received updates from multiple transport commands about expedited pilot movement, but even emergency protocols couldn't overcome the fundamental constraint of geographical distance during time-critical operations. "Sir, the fastest possible pilot arrival time is still 90 minutes. Assuming everything goes perfectly with transport and weather conditions." Major Collins faced the reality that ground forces might be overrun before qualified pilots could arrive to provide necessary air support. The weight of command responsibility pressed heavily on him as he contemplated explaining to families why soldiers died despite having appropriate aircraft and weapons available for successful mission completion. The radio squawked with what might be the final transmission from Alpha 7, their voices carrying the resignation of people facing overwhelming odds without hope of timely assistance. "Base, we're down to small arms ammunition and have no effective anti-armor capabilities remaining. Enemy tanks are closing to point-blank range, and we can't hold these positions much longer." Chief Patterson made one last review of personnel records, while knowing that conventional sources had been exhausted without producing viable solutions for immediate pilot availability. The operations center buzzed with activity as multiple personnel continued desperate attempts to identify emergency options for qualified A-10 operators. Captain Bradley examined mission requirements with the helpless frustration of someone possessing exactly the right capabilities but lacking personnel to execute them effectively. "Sir, this is exactly what A-10s were designed for, and we have perfect aircraft ready for immediate deployment. The tragedy is that pilot availability is preventing mission success." Kaya continued her maintenance work while listening to increasingly desperate conversations about pilot shortages during critical combat operations. The irony wasn't lost on her that operational aircraft sat ready for exactly the mission ground forces needed, but assumptions about pilot qualifications were preventing effective response to life-and-death tactical requirements. The silence in the operations center stretched like a taut wire as Major Collins stared at the tactical display, showing friendly forces in their final defensive positions. Red indicators marked enemy tank columns, advancing methodically toward objectives that would fall within minutes without immediate air intervention. His finger hovered over the radio transmission key, knowing his next words might authorize tactical withdrawal and strategic defeat. Captain Bradley stood motionless beside the mission planning table, his face reflecting the anguish of someone watching preventable disaster unfold due to circumstances beyond control. "Sir," he said quietly, "maybe we should consider authorizing the withdrawal while Alpha 7 still has mobility options available. Staying in position without air support is becoming a suicide mission." Lieutenant Morrison monitored communication channels with the mechanical efficiency of someone maintaining professional duties while processing emotional devastation. "Sir, ground forces are requesting final confirmation about air support timeline. They need to know whether to prepare for tactical withdrawal or maintain defensive positions until help arrives." The weight of command responsibility pressed down on Major Collins as he contemplated decisions that would determine whether soldiers lived or died based on pilot availability rather than tactical capabilities or strategic objectives. Two perfectly operational A-10 Warthogs sat ready for immediate deployment, loaded with precision ordnance specifically designed for destroying enemy armor. Chief Patterson reviewed his exhausted list of contacted air bases and pilot sources with a defeated expression of someone who had explored every conventional option without success. "Major, I made 43 phone calls in the past hour. Every qualified A-10 pilot in the continental United States is either deployed overseas, too distant for timely response, or medically unavailable." The radio crackled with another transmission from Alpha 7, their voice carrying the calm resignation of professional soldiers accepting overwhelming odds. "Base, enemy tanks are within 200 meters of our positions. We're preparing for final defensive stand, but request confirmation about air support status for operational planning purposes." Major Collins felt his throat constrict as he prepared to deliver news that would effectively sentence ground forces to catastrophic losses despite having appropriate aircraft available for successful mission completion. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the radio transmitter to authorize withdrawal that would surrender strategic objectives to enemy control. Captain Bradley examined the tactical display with bitter comprehension about sophisticated military capabilities rendered useless by personnel limitations. "Sir, this is exactly the scenario A-10s were designed to handle. Those aircraft could neutralize enemy armor within minutes and completely reverse the tactical situation if we just had qualified pilots." The operations center filled with tense silence as personnel processed the reality of mission failure due to scheduling conflicts rather than equipment limitations or tactical constraints. Intelligence updates continued showing enemy forces advancing while friendly units faced annihilation despite possessing superior technology and training. Lieutenant Morrison coordinated final attempts with Reserve Command about emergency pilot activation protocols, but even expedited procedures couldn't overcome geographical distance and transport limitations during time-critical operations. "Sir, the absolute fastest pilot response we can achieve is still 75 minutes, assuming perfect conditions." Major Collins stared at aircraft status boards, showing two fully operational Warthogs with appropriate ordnance loads for tank-destroying missions. The irony struck him with devastating force that ground forces would die not from enemy superiority or equipment failure, but from pilot scheduling conflicts that prevented deployment of exactly the right capabilities. Chief Patterson made one final review of personnel databases while knowing that conventional sources had been completely exhausted without producing viable solutions. "Major, unless we have someone with hidden qualifications that doesn't appear in standard records, we're looking at unavoidable mission failure due to pilot availability constraints." The tactical situation reached its breaking point as enemy armor closed to direct fire range, while friendly forces expended their final anti-tank weapons in desperate defensive actions. Without precision air attacks against enemy vehicles, even the most capable ground units faced insurmountable disadvantages against superior numbers and heavy weapons. Captain Bradley voiced a question that everyone understood, but nobody wanted to address directly. "Sir, what do we tell the families when soldiers die because we had the right aircraft and weapons available, but couldn't find pilots to operate them within the required timeline. The radio provided what might be the final operational update from Alpha 7 as their tactical situation deteriorated beyond recovery. Base, we're taking direct fire from main battle tanks at point-blank range. Request permission to attempt emergency withdrawal while some mobility options remain available. Major Collins faced the impossible choice between authorizing retreat that would surrender strategic objectives or maintaining positions that would result in complete unit destruction without timely air support. The weight of command pressed heavily on him as he contemplated explaining preventable losses to superior officers and grieving families. Lieutenant Morrison monitored multiple channels while coordinating with distant air bases about emergency transport options that everyone knew would arrive too late for effective intervention. Sir, even if everything goes perfectly with pilot transport and aircraft preparation, we're still looking at minimum 1-hour response time. The operations center buzzed with final desperate attempts to identify overlooked pilot sources, while everyone understood that conventional options had been exhausted without success. Personnel continued coordinating with multiple installations despite knowing that geographical limitations made timely response impossible. Chief Patterson attempted contact with emergency recall protocols for retired pilots with current medical clearances, but certification requirements and transport constraints made immediate deployment unrealistic. Major, I've explored every possible avenue for qualified personnel within reasonable distance and timeline parameters. Captain Bradley studied mission requirements with the helpless frustration of someone possessing exactly the right capabilities but lacking personnel to execute them during critical combat operations. Sir, we have perfect aircraft for this engagement, sitting ready for immediate deployment, but pilot availability is preventing mission success and causing preventable casualties. The tactical display continued showing enemy positions advancing while friendly forces faced annihilation despite superior training and equipment that couldn't be effectively employed due to personnel constraints. Time passed inexorably while promised air support remained unavailable due to scheduling conflicts that conventional solutions couldn't resolve. Kaya observed the increasingly desperate situation while continuing her maintenance work on aircraft that could provide exactly the combat capabilities ground forces needed. She understood with painful clarity that operational 810S sat ready for the precise mission that could save lives and achieve tactical objectives. But assumptions about pilot qualifications prevented effective response to critical requirements. Major Collins reached for the radio transmitter with the heavy resignation of someone about to authorize tactical withdrawal and accept strategic defeat. His finger paused over the transmission key as he prepared to deliver orders that would abandon ground forces to overwhelming enemy superiority despite having appropriate aircraft sitting ready for immediate deployment. Alpha 7. This is base command, he began, his voice carrying the weight of impossible decisions forced by circumstances beyond operational control. Prepare for authorized tactical withdrawal from current positions. We cannot provide promised air support within your timeline requirements due to pilot availability constraints. The response came immediately, filled with professional disappointment rather than panic. Copy that, base. Alpha 7 understands withdrawal authorization. We'll attempt emergency extraction while mobility options remain available, but enemy armor will secure strategic objectives once we vacate these positions. Captain Bradley stared at the tactical display, showing enemy tank columns advancing methodically toward objectives that would fall within minutes once friendly forces withdrew from defensive positions. Sir, he said with bitter frustration, we're handing them a complete tactical victory because we can't find pilots for aircraft that could destroy their entire armored formation. The operations center filled with the tense silence of personnel processing mission failure due to administrative limitations rather than combat effectiveness or strategic planning. 2 A-10 Warthogs sat fully fueled and armed with appropriate ordnance for tank-destroying missions, their sophisticated systems ready for exactly the engagement ground forces desperately needed. Lieutenant Morrison coordinated withdrawal support while monitoring enemy movements that would exploit friendly retreat within minutes. Sir, once Alpha 7 withdraws, enemy forces will have clear access to the supply depot and communications facility. We're looking at strategic losses that will affect operations across the entire sector. Chief Patterson reviewed final pilot availability reports with a defeated expression of someone who had exhausted every conventional option without success. Major, I've confirmed negative responses from every A-10 squadron within transport range. The earliest qualified pilot we can get here is Lieutenant Colonel Williams, still 90 minutes out, even with priority routing. The radio crackled with updates from Alpha 7 as they prepared emergency withdrawal procedures under direct fire from advancing enemy armor. Base, we're initiating tactical retreat under heavy pressure. Enemy tanks will occupy our positions within 15 minutes and secure strategic objectives shortly thereafter. Major Collins felt the crushing weight of command responsibility as he watched preventable strategic defeat unfold due to pilot scheduling rather than enemy superiority or operational planning failures. The irony struck him with devastating force that sophisticated military capabilities would prove useless because qualified personnel weren't available within required timelines. Captain Bradley examined mission parameters with growing desperation about solutions that might salvage tactical success from apparent disaster. Sir, there has to be something we're missing. Some emergency protocol or overlooked option that could get a 10S airborne before we lose everything to enemy advances. The tactical situation reached its absolute breaking point as enemy armor closed to final assault positions while friendly forces began emergency withdrawal procedures that would surrender critical strategic objectives. Without immediate air intervention, enemy forces would achieve complete tactical victory within minutes. Lieutenant Morrison voiced the desperate question that everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to acknowledge. Sir, what about emergency waivers for cross-qualified pilots? Could we authorize F-16 operators to attempt A-10 missions given the critical circumstances and strategic implications? Major Collins shook his head while reviewing Air Force regulations about aircraft certification requirements during combat operations. The Warthog systems are too specialized for emergency cross-training. Weapons delivery profiles and low-altitude attack procedures require specific certification that can't be waived even during crisis situations. The operations center buzzed with final attempts to identify emergency options, while everyone understood that conventional solutions have been completely exhausted without producing viable alternatives. Personnel continued coordinating with multiple installations despite knowing that geographical and regulatory constraints made immediate response impossible. Chief Patterson attempted one last contact with Emergency Reserve Command about activating retired pilots with emergency recall provisions, but certification requirements and medical clearances made immediate deployment unrealistic even under crisis authorization protocols. Captain Bradley studied available resources with the helpless fury of someone possessing exactly the right capabilities but lacking personnel to employ them effectively during critical combat operations. Sir, we have perfect aircraft for this mission loaded with appropriate ordnance, but bureaucratic constraints are preventing deployment that could save lives and achieve strategic objectives. The radio provided final updates from Alpha 7 as they executed withdrawal procedures under increasing enemy pressure. Base, we're taking casualties during retreat movement. Enemy armor is advancing rapidly and will secure all strategic objectives within the next 10 minutes unless immediate air support materializes. Major Collins stared at aircraft status displays, showing 2 fully operational Warthogs ready for tank-destroying missions that could reverse the tactical situation within minutes if qualified pilots were available. The weight of preventable losses pressed down on him as he contemplated explaining strategic defeat to superior officers despite having appropriate resources available. Lieutenant Morrison coordinated final communication with distant air bases about expedited pilot transport, while knowing that even optimal conditions couldn't produce timely response for effective intervention. Sir, Every option we've explored leads to the same conclusion. Qualified pilots can't reach us within tactical timeline requirements. The tactical display showed enemy forces consolidating advantages, while friendly units faced complete strategic defeat despite superior equipment and training that couldn't be effectively deployed due to personnel limitations. Time continued passing while promised air support remained unavailable due to scheduling conflicts that conventional procedures couldn't resolve. Chief Patterson made final reviews of emergency protocols and personnel databases while knowing that standard options had been exhausted without success. Major, unless we have completely overlooked someone with appropriate qualifications, we're facing unavoidable mission failure due to pilot availability rather than operational or equipment constraints. Captain Bradley voiced the bitter reality that everyone understood, but nobody wanted to acknowledge directly. Sir, somewhere in this country, there are qualified A-10 pilots who could save those soldiers and achieve tactical success, but we can't get them here fast enough to matter for this engagement. The operations center filled with desperate tension as personnel grappled with the reality of watching preventable disaster unfold due to administrative limitations rather than enemy capabilities or strategic planning failures. Ground forces faced annihilation, while perfect aircraft sat ready for missions that could ensure tactical victory if qualified pilots were somehow available. Kaya listened to the increasingly frantic discussions while continuing maintenance work on aircraft that could provide exactly the capabilities needed for mission success. The tragic irony wasn't lost on her that operational A-10s sat ready for the precise engagement that could save lives and achieve strategic objectives, but assumptions about pilot availability were preventing effective response to critical tactical requirements. The sound of Kaya's wrench clattering against the concrete floor echoed through the suddenly silent operations center as she stepped forward from her maintenance station. Every head turned toward the figure in oil-stained coveralls who had remained invisible throughout their desperate search for qualified pilots during the most critical mission of their careers. "Major," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere with unexpected clarity. "I'm rated on the Warthog. Current certification, recent flight hours, and combat experience. I can have aircraft airborne within 10 minutes if you need immediate air support for Alpha 7. The operations center erupted in stunned silence before Captain Bradley's voice broke through with incredulous disbelief. "What did you just say?" he demanded, his expression shifting from desperation to confusion as he processed words that didn't align with his understanding of military hierarchy and pilot qualifications. Major Collins stared at Kaya with the bewildered expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions about personnel capabilities had just been shattered. "Sergeant," he said slowly, "are you telling me that you're a qualified A-10 pilot? That you have current certification and combat experience in Warthog operations?" Kaya met his gaze with steady confidence, despite the hostile attention now focused on her from officers who had dismissed her as simple support personnel. "Yes, sir. I'm fully qualified on the A-10 with over 400 combat hours and current proficiency ratings on all weapon systems. I can provide immediate close air support for ground forces, if authorized." Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward with skeptical disbelief written across his features. "That's impossible," he said flatly. "We've reviewed every pilot record on this base multiple times. There's no way a maintenance sergeant could have A-10 qualifications without appearing in our personnel databases and squadron rosters." Captain Bradley examined Kaya with the suspicious scrutiny of someone questioning apparent deception during crisis situations. "Sergeant, if you have pilot qualifications, why are you working as maintenance personnel instead of flying operational missions? That doesn't make sense given pilot shortages and operational requirements." Kaya maintained professional composure despite the atmosphere of doubt and hostility surrounding her unexpected revelation. "Sir, I cross-trained into maintenance specialties to understand aircraft systems from multiple perspectives. My pilot qualifications remain current, but my primary assignment has been maintenance operations for the past 18 months. Chief Patterson frantically consulted personnel files on his tablet, while searching for documentation that might support Kaya's claims about pilot certification. His expression reflected growing confusion as he encountered records that didn't align with standard personnel classification systems. Major Collins felt reality shifting around him as he processed implications of having qualified pilots available while soldiers died due to assumed personnel shortages. "Sergeant," he said carefully, "I need to see documentation of your pilot qualifications immediately. This is too critical for any misunderstandings about capabilities or certifications." Kaya reached for her identification folder with movements that remained steady despite the intense scrutiny from officers who had spent the past hour dismissing her technical expertise. "Sir, my pilot records are maintained separately from maintenance personnel files. I have current flight physical, weapons qualifications, and combat certifications all within required timeframes." Captain Bradley examined the documents with the careful attention of someone verifying information that contradicted fundamental assumptions about military organization and personnel management. His expression shifted from skepticism toward grudging acknowledgement as he reviewed certifications that appeared legitimate and current. The radio crackled with another desperate transmission from Alpha 7 as their tactical situation continued deteriorating during the verification process. "Base, enemy tanks are within 100 meters and closing fast. We're taking direct fire while attempting withdrawal. Request immediate status on promised air support or authorization for final retreat procedures." Lieutenant Morrison studied Kaya's pilot credentials with growing amazement about overlooked capabilities that had been available throughout their desperate search for qualified personnel. "Sir, these certifications appear genuine and current. She has more recent 810 combat experience than most of our squadron pilots." Major Collins processed the stunning realization that qualified pilots had been available on base while he prepared to authorize strategic defeat due to assumed personnel shortages. The weight of near-catastrophic decision-making pressed down on him as he contemplated how close they had come to preventable disaster. Chief Patterson located additional documentation in classified personnel systems that confirmed Kaya's pilot qualifications and combat experience. "Major, her records show extensive 810 operations in multiple combat theaters with exceptional performance ratings and current proficiency certifications on all weapon systems." Captain Bradley stared at the maintenance sergeant who had just revealed capabilities that could save lives and achieve tactical objectives he had assumed were impossible due to pilot availability. The cognitive dissonance of discovering expert qualifications in someone he had dismissed as simple support personnel left him struggling to process revised understanding. The tactical display continued showing enemy armor advancing, while friendly forces faced annihilation. But suddenly the situation had transformed from hopeless to salvageable if command could rapidly adjust to unexpected personnel revelations. Time remained critical, but qualified pilots were apparently available for immediate deployment. Lieutenant Morrison voiced the question that everyone was thinking about the stunning discovery of overlooked capabilities. "Sir, how did we miss having qualified 810 pilots available during our entire search process? This completely changes our operational options for supporting ground forces." Major Collins examined Kaya's documentation while processing implications of having sophisticated capabilities available that standard personnel systems had failed to identify during crisis operations. The administrative oversight that had nearly caused strategic defeat through assumed pilot shortages revealed fundamental problems with personnel management and capability awareness. Kaya maintained professional readiness despite the shocked attention from officers who were rapidly recalibrating their understanding of available resources and personnel qualifications. "Sir, if you authorize immediate deployment, I can have aircraft airborne and providing close air support within 8 minutes. Alpha 7's tactical situation remains salvageable with immediate air intervention." Captain Bradley struggled to process the transformation from hopeless defeat to possible victory based on discovering qualified personnel who had been dismissed as irrelevant to operational planning. The maintenance sergeant he had condescended to throughout the day possessed exactly the capabilities needed for mission success. The operations center buzzed with renewed energy as personnel shifted from accepting defeat to coordinating immediate deployment of unexpected resources. Radio communications intensified as command prepared to authorize air support that had seemed impossible just moments before due to pilot availability constraints that had suddenly evaporated. Major Collins stared at Kaya with growing comprehension about expertise that had been systematically overlooked despite desperate need for exactly her qualifications. The weight of command responsibility shifted from accepting preventable defeat to coordinating immediate response that could save lives and achieve tactical objectives through capabilities that had been available throughout the crisis. Major Collins's hands trembled slightly as he authorized immediate flight clearance, his voice carrying renewed authority as the impossible suddenly became achievable. Sergeant Thorne, you are cleared for immediate combat deployment. Get that Warthog airborne and provide close air support for Alpha 7. Lives depend on your immediate response. Kaya moved toward the aircraft with purposeful strides that transformed her from dismissed maintenance personnel into the qualified combat pilot she had always been. Captain Bradley watched in stunned amazement as she conducted pre-flight procedures with the practiced efficiency of someone intimately familiar with every system, switch, and control surface. The A-10 Warthog's massive engines roared to life under Kaya's expert touch, their familiar thunder filling the hangar with renewed hope for ground forces facing annihilation. Lieutenant Morrison stared at the aircraft he had seen her maintain countless times, now understanding that her mechanical expertise had been coupled with pilot qualifications that could save lives. Control Tower. This is Reaper 1 requesting immediate takeoff clearance for combat air support mission. Kaya's voice crackled through radio systems with calm professionalism that belied the desperate circumstances. I have Alpha 7's coordinates and am armed with appropriate anti-armor ordnance for immediate engagement. The tower responded immediately with priority clearance as personnel throughout the base processed the stunning transformation of their maintenance sergeant into the combat pilot who would determine tactical success or failure. Reaper 1, you are cleared for immediate takeoff. All traffic is being diverted to provide unrestricted flight path to target area. Captain Bradley watched through hangar windows as the Warthog taxied toward the runway with movements that demonstrated expert aircraft handling from someone he had dismissed as incapable of understanding flight operations. His assumptions about military hierarchy and pilot qualifications crumbled as he witnessed undeniable proof of expertise he had systematically ignored. The radio erupted with urgent transmissions from Alpha 7 as their tactical situation reached its final breaking point. Base, enemy tanks are 50 meters from our positions and closing fast. We're down to small arms and grenades with no effective anti-armor capabilities remaining. Request immediate confirmation of air support status. Major Collins keyed his radio with renewed confidence as he provided updates that would have seemed impossible just minutes earlier. Alpha 7, this is Base Command. Reaper 1 is airborne and inbound to your location with anti-armor ordnance. Maintain defensive positions and prepare for immediate close air support against enemy armor. The response reflected amazement and relief from ground forces who had been preparing for overwhelming defeat just moments before. Copy that, Base. Alpha 7 is marking targets and preparing for friendly air support. We have visual confirmation of 6 T-72 tanks advancing on our positions from the northeast. Kaya's A-10 thundered down the runway with a distinctive roar of engines designed for close air support missions. Lieutenant Morrison watched the takeoff with growing comprehension about capabilities that had been available throughout their desperate search for qualified pilots, hidden in plain sight by assumptions about maintenance personnel. The tactical display showed friendly aircraft approaching the combat zone, while enemy armor continued advancing toward objectives they had seemed certain to capture. Chief Patterson coordinated communications between air and ground forces while processing the stunning reversal of strategic fortunes based on discovering overlooked pilot qualifications. Reaper 1 approaching target area. Kaya transmitted with calm professionalism as she prepared to engage enemy armor, threatening friendly forces. I have visual confirmation of enemy tank formation advancing on Alpha 7 positions. Requesting final clearance for weapons engagement against marked targets. Major Collins authorized immediate weapon release while watching tactical displays that showed salvation arriving for ground forces who had faced certain destruction minutes earlier. Reaper 1, you are cleared hot for immediate engagement of enemy armor. Alpha 7 has marked targets and is standing by for your attack run. The A-10's distinctive cannon fire echoed across the battlefield as Kaya engaged enemy tanks with precision that demonstrated extensive combat experience and expert marksmanship. Captain Bradley listened to radio reports of successful target engagement while struggling to reconcile the maintenance sergeant he had dismissed with the combat pilot, saving lives through superior skill. Alpha 7 transmitted excited updates about the devastating effectiveness of close air support they had nearly been denied due to administrative oversight. Base, Reaper 1 is destroying enemy armor with precision attacks. 3 tanks confirmed destroyed, and remaining enemy vehicles are withdrawing under accurate fire. Lieutenant Morrison coordinated tactical communications while processing the cognitive dissonance of watching someone he had condescended to demonstrate combat capabilities that exceeded most squadron pilots. The maintenance sergeant who had been excluded from briefings was proving superior knowledge of aircraft systems and tactical employment. The radio crackled with continued reports of successful engagement as Kaya systematically neutralized enemy threats with expert precision. Reaper 1 engaging final target, she transmitted calmly. Enemy armor formation is neutralized and Alpha 7 positions are secure. Remaining hostile forces are in full retreat. Major Collins felt overwhelming relief as tactical victory replaced certain defeat through the expertise of personnel who had been systematically overlooked despite desperate need for their qualifications. The weight of command responsibility shifted from accepting preventable casualties to coordinating successful mission completion through discovered capabilities. Chief Patterson updated tactical displays showing enemy withdrawal and friendly force security while reflecting on administrative failures that had nearly caused strategic disaster. Personnel systems had failed to identify available pilots during crisis operations, revealing fundamental problems with capability assessment and resource management. Captain Bradley watched Kaya's A-10 return from successful combat engagement, while confronting the reality that his assumptions about military hierarchy and pilot qualifications had been completely wrong. The maintenance sergeant he had dismissed possessed superior combat experience and technical knowledge that had proven decisive for mission success. Alpha 7 transmitted final status reports confirming tactical victory and strategic objective security. Base, all enemy armor destroyed or withdrawn. Alpha 7 positions are secure and strategic objectives remain under friendly control. Reaper 1 provided decisive air support that prevented catastrophic losses. The operations center buzzed with activity as personnel processed successful mission completion through capabilities that standard procedures had failed to identify during crisis operations. Kaya's expertise had transformed certain defeat into tactical victory, but her qualifications had remained invisible until desperate circumstances forced revelation. Lieutenant Morrison coordinated post-mission communications while struggling to process how completely his understanding of available resources had been incorrect. The maintenance sergeant who had been excluded from operational planning possessed exactly the capabilities needed for mission success, hidden by assumptions about personnel classification. Major Collins prepared debrief procedures while reflecting on administrative oversights that had nearly caused preventable disaster through failure to recognize available pilot qualifications. The expertise needed for tactical success had been present throughout the crisis, but conventional personnel management had failed to identify qualified personnel during desperate search operations. The A-10 Warthog touched down on the runway with the precise control of an expert pilot as Kaya completed her return from the mission that had transformed certain defeat into decisive victory. Ground crews rushed toward the aircraft with expressions reflecting amazement about the maintenance sergeant who had revealed herself as their most experienced combat pilot when lives hung in the balance. Major Collins stood on the tarmac with his command staff as Kaya shut down engines and completed post-flight procedures with the same methodical expertise she had demonstrated during countless maintenance operations. His expression carried profound respect, mixed with embarrassment about assumptions that had nearly caused catastrophic losses through administrative blindness. Captain Bradley approached the aircraft with hesitant steps, his previous condescension replaced by genuine awe at witnessing superior combat performance from someone he had systematically dismissed as incapable of understanding flight operations. The maintenance sergeant who had been excluded from pilot briefings possessed more A-10 experience than anyone in their squadron. Sergeant Thorne, Major Collins said as Kaya climbed down from the cockpit, his voice carrying formal recognition that should have been accorded months earlier. Outstanding mission performance. Your actions saved lives and achieved strategic objectives that would have been lost without your immediate intervention. Kaya removed her helmet with quiet professionalism despite the transformed atmosphere surrounding her revelation of capabilities that had been ignored throughout her assignment to maintenance operations. Thank you, sir. Alpha 7 is secure and enemy armor has been neutralized. All aircraft systems performed optimally during combat engagement. Lieutenant Morrison stared at the woman who had maintained aircraft he flew while possessing superior qualifications that conventional personnel systems had failed to recognize during crisis operations. Sergeant, he said with genuine curiosity, replacing former dismissal, how long have you been rated on the Warthog? Your combat performance exceeded anything we've seen from squadron pilots. 4 years of combat operations across multiple theaters, Kaya replied simply. Over 400 combat hours with extensive anti-armor experience and current proficiency ratings on all weapon systems. I requested maintenance cross-training to understand aircraft from multiple perspectives, but my pilot qualifications remained current throughout. Chief Patterson approached with personnel files that revealed the administrative complexity that had hidden qualified pilots in plain sight during desperate searches for available personnel. Sergeant, I owe you an apology. Your pilot credentials were filed under specialized programs that standard personnel searches didn't access during emergency operations. Captain Bradley struggled to process the cognitive dissonance of discovering that the maintenance sergeant he had condescended to possess combat experience that dwarfed his own training background. Sergeant, he said with obvious difficulty, I need to apologize for my assumptions about your capabilities and technical knowledge. Your expertise clearly exceeded anything I recognized. The hangar filled with personnel who gathered to witness the transformation of someone they had dismissed as simple support staff into the combat pilot whose skills had prevented strategic disaster. Kaya's revelation challenged fundamental assumptions about military hierarchy and the relationship between different specialties within complex organizations. Major Collins examined after-action reports showing flawless mission execution with 0 friendly casualties and complete neutralization of enemy armor through precision weapons employment. Sergeant Thorne, your performance today demonstrates exceptional pilot skills and tactical judgment that this command failed to recognize despite having access to your qualifications. The radio crackled with continued gratitude from Alpha 7 as they provided detailed reports about Kaya's devastating effectiveness against enemy armor. Base Reaper 1's precision attacks saved our entire unit from annihilation. Her target identification and weapons delivery were textbook perfect under extremely challenging tactical conditions. Lieutenant Morrison voiced the question that everyone was considering about administrative failures that had nearly caused preventable casualties through personnel mismanagement. Sir, how do we ensure that similar oversights don't hide critical capabilities during future emergency operations? This situation revealed serious problems with personnel assessment. Chief Patterson consulted revised personnel databases while identifying systemic issues that had prevented recognition of available qualifications during crisis operations. Major, We need comprehensive review of specialty program classifications to ensure emergency searches access all qualified personnel regardless of current assignment specialties. Kaya observed the discussions about administrative reform while maintaining professional composure despite the dramatic reversal in how command staff viewed her capabilities and contributions. The maintenance sergeant who had been systematically excluded from operational planning was now recognized as their most qualified combat pilot. Captain Bradley examined mission reports with growing appreciation for expertise that had been invisible despite desperate need for exactly those qualifications. "Sergeant," he said with genuine respect, "your knowledge of A-10 systems from both maintenance and operational perspectives provides unique insights that could benefit the entire squadron." The tactical display showed secure, friendly positions and withdrawn enemy forces, confirming strategic success through capabilities that conventional personnel management had failed to identify during critical operations. Kaya's expertise had transformed certain defeat into decisive victory, but administrative blindness had nearly prevented access to necessary skills. Before we conclude, if you connected with this story about hidden expertise being overlooked and then proven in critical moments, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part. Maybe you've witnessed similar situations where someone surprised everyone by revealing capabilities that have been dismissed or underestimated. Your thoughts and experiences add depth to these remarkable stories of recognition earned through demonstrated excellence. Major Collins addressed assembled personnel with the authority of someone implementing immediate changes to prevent similar oversights during future operations. Effective immediately, we're conducting comprehensive review of all specialty program qualifications to ensure emergency operations access complete personnel capabilities regardless of current assignment classifications. The hangar buzzed with conversations about the stunning revelation that had transformed their understanding of available resources and personnel capabilities. Kaya's expertise had been present throughout their desperate search for qualified pilots, but assumptions about maintenance personnel had rendered her invisible to conventional assessment procedures. Lieutenant Morrison coordinated with personnel management about implementing revised procedures that would prevent qualified capabilities from being overlooked during emergency operations. The maintenance sergeant who had been dismissed as irrelevant to flight operations possessed exactly the skills needed for mission success. Chief Patterson updated personnel systems with flags that would ensure specialty qualifications appeared in emergency searches regardless of current assignment classifications. Administrative reforms would prevent similar oversights from hiding critical capabilities when lives depended on rapid identification of available expertise. Captain Bradley approached Kaya with the respectful bearing of someone acknowledging superior qualifications that had been systematically ignored through administrative blindness. "Sergeant," he said formally, "I request permission to learn from your expertise about A-10 systems from both maintenance and operational perspectives." The transformation was complete as Kaya received recognition that should have been accorded from her arrival at the base. Her expertise had saved lives and achieved strategic objectives while revealing fundamental problems with how military organizations assessed and utilized available personnel capabilities during critical operations.